I'm Laura London, and this is a special video edition of Speaking of Jung. Joining us today for episode 151 is Jungian psychoanalyst, author, writer, lecturer, and playwright Dr. Murray Stein in Zürich, Switzerland. And later, I will be joined by his biographer, Jungian psychoanalyst Dr. Stephen Herman in Oakland, California. After graduating from Yale University in New Haven, Connecticut, Dr. Stein went on to attend Yale Divinity School, earning a Master of Divinity in 1969. That same year, he began training as a Jungian psychoanalyst at the C.G. Jung Institute in Zürich, Switzerland, and worked as a managing editor for James Hillman's Spring Publications. Upon graduating with a diploma in analytical psychology at age 30, he returned to the United States and settled in Chicago, where he established himself as a training analyst and began doctoral work at the University of Chicago Divinity School. He is a founding member of the C.G. Jung Institute of Chicago, was elected its first president, and served for 5 years as head of the Chicago Society of Jungian Analysts. Along with fellow Jungian analyst Dr. Nathan Schwartz-Salant, Dr. Stein co-organized and co-hosted the Ghost Ranch conferences in New Mexico. The papers from those conferences were later published in the Chiron Clinical Series after the two co-founded Chiron Publications in 1983. The following year, Dr. Stein was awarded his Ph.D. in Religion and Psychological Studies. While serving as honorary secretary of the International Association for Analytical Psychology under Thomas Kirsch, Dr. Stein began traveling widely, lecturing in China, Europe, Japan, Mexico, and South Africa. Dr. Stein served as president of the IAAP for 3 years, and in 2003, at age 60, returned to Switzerland, where he became a training and supervising analyst at the International School of Analytical Psychology, known as ISAP Zürich. He served as the school's president from 2008 to 2012 and continues to chair their Zürich lecture series. He is the author, co-author, editor, and co-editor of numerous books, articles, essays, and stage plays, all of which are listed on the special Murray Stein page on our blog. His most popular book, Jung's Map of the Soul, has been published in 13 languages, and in 2020, Chiron began publishing his collected writings, with the 9th volume released this year on April 13th. He now lives a quiet life in the mountains outside of Zurich, where he continues to write plays with friend and fellow Jungian analyst Dr. Henry Abramovich. Their most recent collaborations are Twilight at Bowling Inn and Reading Room. Dr. Stein joins us today after 2.5 years for his 15th appearance on Speaking of Jung to discuss his latest book, Jung and Alchemy, A Path to Individuation, published by Chiron on July 24th. Dr. Stein will join us after these words. Speaking of Jung is a listener-supported show. Please consider joining our Patreon for just $5 a month, and you will receive all of my research notes for this episode. And please be sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel. It's free and it helps us to get more exposure. I am also here to remind you of the importance of recording your dreams. Temenos Dream is a revolutionary dream tracking app available for iOS and Android. Now you can record your dreams by speaking into your phone or typing them into the app. Search for myths, legends, and fairy tales related to the themes in your dreams. Use the advanced AI interpretation with a focus on Jung's work, looking closely at symbols and associations to consider shadow, anima, animus, archetypes, and much more. Simply download the app and create a free account. Unlimited use is available with a premium subscription. Click on the link in the description box below or on our website, speakingofjung.com, where you will find links to everything discussed in this episode in the show notes. This video interview is being recorded on Wednesday, November 5th, 2025, through the magic of StreamYard. Hi, Dr. Stein.
Hi, Laura. Nice to be back again with you.
It's really great to see you again. It's been a while. And we've got a lot to get caught up on.
Let's go.
Let's go. So we are actually going to focus on your latest book today. It's titled Jung and Alchemy. And as I mentioned to you before, I've been wanting to do an episode about alchemy because it is a popular topic, but I don't know that it's that well understood. So tell us, if you would, a little bit about, first of all, what is included in this book.
Well, let me show you the cover to start. This is what it looks like. Okay,
Mhm.
and you see that picture on there. That's a painting that was made by Diane Stanley from a stained glass window that she found somewhere in England. And there you see a picture of Mercurius.
Mm.
Mercurius is you could say, the spirit of alchemy. Jung called him the spirit of the unconscious, but he is what makes the alchemical process go. He's the agent and I would say the energy that keeps the work moving along. And sometimes he's fire, and sometimes he's air and wind, and sometimes he's a snake, and he can be all kinds of things. But he is, in Jung's view, is the unconscious force that pushes individuation forward. The unconscious wants to individuate, wants to become conscious. And Mercurius is the agent that brings it into consciousness. Mm-hmm. So in this book, I try to give an introduction to Jung's writings on alchemy, which are so numerous. Jung's collected works consists of 18 volumes, 18 plus 1, 9. Volume 9 is actually 2 books.
Right.
And 3 of those volumes, so 3 out of 19, which is a pretty high percentage, are dedicated solely to his alchemical work, his alchemical studies, volumes 12, 13, and 14. And then woven into many of the other volumes are references to alchemy and papers on alchemy. For instance, when Jung writes about the psychology of the transference, he uses the alchemical pictures in the Rosarium Philosophorum to discuss the phenomenon, the psychological phenomenon of projection and transference in analysis. So for Jung, and in preparation of our conversation today, I was thinking about Jung's work on alchemy again. And it occurred to me to say that Jung was a passionate interpreter. Mm. He had a sort of a hermeneutic gene in him. Mm. He interprets everything. Everything he touches, he interprets. And I think he gets this from his ancestors. His father was a Old Testament scholar. His grandfather on his mother's side was a very, very prominent Swiss Reformed minister who spoke Hebrew and was very conversant with the biblical texts. And they were interpreters of the Bible. And Jung also interprets the Bible. Jung interprets everything that he lays his hands on. And so what he does with alchemy is he interprets it. And he uses it for psychological purposes. So it's like he's mining this vast area of the alchemical tradition, which began around the time of Christ's birth. It's about 2,000 years ago, and was very, very strong and prominent in the Arab world, and then translated into Latin, and in the Middle Ages throughout Europe, there were alchemical laboratories functioning and alchemists, alchemical philosophers. And then in the 17th, 18th century, it turned into a kind of philosophy because of the beginning of science, the scientific method, and chemistry came along and pushed alchemy aside. Mm. And alchemy just became a philosophy. But Jung sees alchemy as a very important, aspect of Goethe's Faust. That Goethe was the latest alchemist, he said. But Goethe didn't work in a laboratory, but he was familiar with alchemical philosophy and imagery. And Jung, as you know, claims to be related to Goethe.
Right.
A great-great-grandson, something like that. That was the rumor in the family. It wasn't ever proven one way or another, but he held that very close, and he feels a close affinity to Goethe. So he has a kind of connection to the alchemists, and he had a dream about being trapped in the 17th century, I think, in the alchemical era. And so he, from about 1930 on, he took a great interest in alchemy and started buying alchemical books and tried to start reading them, which is extremely difficult.
Yeah.
They're riddles. They speak a kind of coded language, and he had to decipher the code. So he made notebooks and watched where this word appear and that word would appear, and he made himself little dictionaries in preparation. So then he started interpreting alchemy. Why was alchemy so interesting to him? I asked Nathan Schwartz-Salant this one time, because Nathan was also very interested in the alchemical metaphors. And Nathan said, it's because it's all about transformation.
Mm.
And that was Jung's theme. Individuation is a transformation process.
Mm.
And so in alchemy, you have this process of moving from the base materials to the noble materials, from what we would call the unconscious into high levels of consciousness and on up to spirituality and so on. So this fascinated Jung about alchemy, and he wasn't going to settle for just skimming over the surface.
Right.
He went deep. And so he would buy the original alchemy books as they came on the market. They were very cheap at that time. And he had built up a very nice alchemy library in his home, which is still there. If you go and visit the museum, his house, which is now a museum in Kuznets, you can see the alchemy collection there.
Wow.
And then he found a companion in this, in Mary Louise von Franz. Mm-hmm. She was a student at the university, and she was very, very gifted with languages, and I think she wrote her dissertation on medieval Latin. And so she helped Jung translate what he couldn't make much sense of in the alchemy books. But his Latin and Greek were pretty good. He could get most of it, but there she was, his assistant at his side. So he had some companionship in this journey. And then he took the alchemy metaphors and images and symbols and used those to interpret. So he interpreted alchemy, and then he used alchemy to interpret the dreams of Wolfgang Pauli.
Right.
And that's in volume 12, Psychology and Alchemy, part 2. So then using the alchemical model to interpret unconscious material became a second stage of his hermeneutical efforts with alchemy. So in this book, I write about, I have, I think, 5 or 6 chapters. Let me take a look. Lecture 4, Alchemy in a Dream series. And that it was Wolfgang Pauli. It wasn't known for many years. So when Jung wrote his interpretation of Pauli's dreams and images and presented them to a number of audiences and then wrote them up for publication, people didn't know who he was talking about. Mm-hmm. And at first, they thought it was some student that had approached him from the ETH, where he was a professor. Mm-hmm. And he describes the man as a young man, a scientist. Turns out to be Wolfgang Pauli, who is one of the founders of quantum physics. and won a Nobel Prize for Physics, I think in 1946. And Pauli came to Jung for therapy. He was having difficulties, not in his professional life, but in his personal life, especially with relationships with women. And Jung sent him to an attractive female student of his because he thought that's what Pauli needed to work on, and he would have a good transference and she could help him with it. And apparently she did. It seemed to work well. And Pauli produced a vast amount of material, dreams and active imagination material, that he then turned over to Jung and said, you can use this for your scientific purposes. And Jung latched onto it, found his dreams fascinating, and used alchemical imagery to interpret. So his use of alchemy is really to understand psyche at a deep level. And when I studied at the Jung Institute, beginning in 1969, I went to the director of studies, who was at that time Alfred Riebe. And Alfred Riebe, would meet with students who came and give them a little survey of what they were in for at the Institute, what the requirements were, and so on. And I asked him, well, when we get around to studying alchemy, will we have to read the text in German? And he said, oh, no, we don't study alchemy. That's too advanced for our students.
Oh, interesting.
So we never touched alchemy. And occasionally you would hear a lecture about something about alchemy, but it was not a requirement. There were no exams on alchemy. And to this day, I don't think there are any exams in the Jungian institutes on the topic of alchemy. And it is very difficult. It's difficult to read. It's difficult to understand what Jung is talking about. But if you stay with it, it's immensely fascinating. I've been reading Mysterium Conjunctionis, Volume 14, which is Jung's last great work, published in 1955. I've been reading that since I went to Houston, Texas in 1973, actually before Chicago. I lived for 3 years in Houston. And when I came there, I was asked by the director of studies, Ruth Thacker Fry, to teach a course on alchemy. And the students were interested in, quote, Mysterium Conjunctionis. I hadn't laid eyes on it. So I had to learn with them. So we started on page 1 and started going through, and I've been reading it ever since. And I still work with students on it. And it's gotten to the point where I read all the footnotes and I look up the texts, because now it's very easy. You can find the text online.
Yeah.
You just Google it and there it is in front of you.
That's interesting. Yeah, that was the first volume of Jung's collected works that I bought. And also another interesting thing is I had in the introduction that you went to Houston, Texas before Chicago, but I was editing and it was too long and I cut that out. And then you mentioned it. Where were you teaching in Houston? I didn't know about that.
At the Houston Jung Center. The Houston Jung Center at that time was in a rather modest apartment. And then while I was there, what's her name? Carolyn Fay gave a huge donation. She bought a building that had been an art gallery and donated it to the Jung Center. And that's a beautiful building right across the street from the Art Institute.
Yeah, I was just there this year.
Oh, really?
I got to visit very briefly when I was in Houston for a conference. And I recommend anybody who is in the area. They have a beautiful bookstore. It's really quite something.
Lovely building, yes. And then after I left, I was there for 3 years. I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't take the heat in Texas. The culture was too much for me.
Yeah.
So I moved to more familiar territory, Chicago, and where June Singer was located. And June Singer was really helped me so much to get established in Chicago. She was a big presence in Chicago. She wrote wonderful books that are still valuable to read. I just pulled one off the shelf the other day. Her Book of Gnostic Hours. It's a lovely text for meditation. A very deep person. And so in Chicago, I did continue teaching occasionally alchemy, but not a great deal. And it's in the past few years, I would say the past 5 or 6 years, that I've really focused more on it with some students online. And we've been reading these texts. I've done alchemy seminars with the Jungians in Taiwan, of all things, every other week we've done, I think, 104 sessions now.
Wow.
104 one-hour sessions on
What?
Jung's works on alchemy. And
That's incredible.
I think they're all recorded. And we're now working our way through slowly, line by line, the Psychology of the Transference, which is a powerful text. I didn't realize it until I got into it again. It's about something that can happen in analysis. I don't think it happens that frequently, the way he describes it, that this powerful love experience takes place. And he's talking about a very particular kind of relationship. That the analyst is a man, and the patient, the client, is a woman. That's the way he has it set up, and I think that was his experience of these types of relationships that develop. And she projects the animus to the analyst, and he projects the anima to the patient, and they get all lost in projections and confusion. And so he makes his way through this process toward resolution and what he calls the development of kinship libido. It's a kind of love that is controlled. It's not out of control, but it's difficult to control because it creates illusions, expectations, all that happens when one becomes deeply fascinated by the other and engaged in a process with the other. But he says this is the way individuation takes place. He says you cannot individuate without an other.
Is this what you refer to as the love cure?
Well, that was Freud. I think one of Freud's patients came to him, and maybe Freud said that. This is the talking cure. That was one expression, or the love cure, because Freud was very keen on the transference. And when Jung went to visit him in 1908, they had long conversations, and Freud said at one point, "And do you understand the transference, Dr. Jung?" And Jung said, "Oh, the transference, that is all." Freud said, "Oh, you have understood." It's when Jung was in the midst of his fascination with Sabine Spielrein. That was his first analytic case, and he experienced a very, very strong projection onto this beautiful young Russian woman. And she to him, he was her doctor, and he became her mentor and was her, what they call a Doktorvater in German universities. He was the sponsor and faculty member who guided her through her dissertation writing. So they were very close. And it really bothered him because here he is a married guy. He's got a beautiful, rich wife at home and a number of children, and this is happening to him in the office. And he doesn't know what's going on, so he takes it to Freud, and Freud isn't much help. And Jung worked on this problem, I think, all his life, if you want to call it a problem, because he was very open to relationships in the sessions. He didn't hide behind a screen. He didn't stay in a persona. He was present, and he let the patient affect him, and he in turn would affect the patient. And so a kind of more than just a therapeutic rapport, but a real powerful connection developed. And then they would have to sort things out and try to make use of what's coming into consciousness from the unconscious as a result of this. He says that a man will become aware of the anima first of all, through the projection. You can't just go inward and find her. You find her out in a love affair. And then you've had the experience, then you find figures within, and over time you can, what we call integrate. You can find something like that within yourself, and it makes you less dependent, let's say, on the other. It relieves the other of projection as well. It relieves the relationship if you realize what's going on. And the woman, on the other side, she gets in contact with the animus through the projection, and then she finds her inner voice. The animus is your logos, your voice, your thinking, your spiritual life. You don't depend on a priest for it. You have it within yourself. So, and alchemy, just back to that, presents these kinds of situations, where there are two, quotes, opposites. Salt is the feminine and sulfur is the masculine, or the king and the queen, or the sun and the moon. That's how the opposites are represented. And the task is to bring them together. And when they come together, they create a third thing, which the alchemists called, the lapis philosophorum, the stone of the philosophers, or the alexipharmacon, or the magical object that can cure and heal or transform base metals into gold. And so this process of bringing them together in the mercurial fountain, or the mercurial bath, that dissolves differences first and unites them, and then they produce a child, and then the child comes back into them, and and this forms what's called the rebus. It's a single person with 2 arms, 2 legs, and 2 heads. So that's like you have consciousness, ego consciousness over here, a kind of rational component, reality functioning. And over here on the left side, you have lunar consciousness connected to the anima and the inner world, and eros and feeling. So you have both in the end. That's the object, to integrate conscious and unconscious. And that's what Jung says he discovered in alchemy. Now, the alchemists didn't know they were doing that, but they created symbols for this union of the opposites that Jung could use in his interpretations for psychology and for thinking about the individuation process as he and his patients were experiencing it.
So alchemy is a metaphor, and we talked about what value that had for Jung. How is the Red Book alchemical?
Well, the Red Book is Jung's midlife crisis, basically, and it's his, he calls it an experiment to delve into the hidden part of the soul. So he starts out by calling my soul, where are you? Because he's been involved in scientific work. He's been involved in a kind of what science is a extroverted thinking function, where you look at objects, you analyze them, you try to figure out how they are put together, what causes them to move or change. It's all out there. So he was treating his patients as out there. And he was looking at interpreting Miss Miller's fantasies as out there, somebody else. And then from his work with Miss Miller's fantasies, that's volume 5 of the collected works, in 1911-12, that's when he was breaking away from Freud, he discovered that through the use of fantasy, or what he called fantasy thinking, so you have 2 types of thinking that he writes about. You have directed thinking, and you have non-directed or fantasy thinking. Through using fantasy thinking, a kind of another intellectual function, you get at material that the rational functioning can't get at. something else becomes available. So he leaves the spirit of the times, as he says, goes into the spirit of death, and starts imagining. That's a kind of meditation. He opens himself up to his imagination, and he waits until something can happen. And then what happens is that he confronts certain figures and has conversations with them, and they tell him they're real. This is psychic reality he's discovering now, and magic and all of that. And it was a transformation process for him.
For him.
For him. It was a very personal development, individuation process in which Jung became a Jungian. He wasn't a Freudian anymore. He really had discovered a different way of working with the psyche. And then he applied that with patients. Now, all of that is before his alchemical studies. His alchemical studies start at the end of the Red Book period, 1928, when he gets a translation from Richard Wilhelm of The Secret of the Golden Flower, a Chinese alchemy text. And Wilhelm asked him if he would be interested in writing a brief introduction to it. And he gets so fascinated by it that he really writes more than a brief introduction. He writes an extended essay, and he gets interested in alchemy through that. Now, not much had been written about alchemy before, but there was one book by Herbert Silber, who was in Freud's circle also. And he wrote a book on alchemy and mysticism that Jung had looked at, but and I think that was published around 1915 or 1912, in that period somewhere. But Jung didn't really take a deep interest in alchemy at that time. So you could say what he experienced in the Red Book period was a personal alchemical transformation. Then when he discovered The Secret of the Golden Flower and alchemy, he says, it broke me out of my isolation. I saw other people had been doing this too. The Chinese alchemists were doing the same thing. So he discovered his kinship group. He discovered his brothers, sisters, alchemists. And from there, he started collecting alchemy books and studying it. So the way he looked at his Red Book phase, you could say his midlife transformation process, was then through alchemical eyes. He said, I was doing what they're doing. They're doing it with materials in the laboratory. I was doing it with imagination in my office. But it's the same process, and we end up at the same place, creating images that are eternal, immortal. We discover, the depths of the collective unconscious, the archetypal world. So he was doing a type of alchemy without knowing it when he did the Red Book.
I had pulled this quote out of your book about when you were mentioning the Red Book. You wrote, Jung understood that the figures he encountered were not symbols of the inner realities of the unconscious, but fundamental aspects of himself, conveying core truths, archetypal patterns, and essential elements and processes of his psychic nature. So perhaps I thought that process that he went through in the Red Book kind of led him to alchemy and to understand.
Exactly, yeah, in that sense. He didn't link it to alchemy until he, according to his reports anyway, until he read The Secret of the Golden Flower about Chinese alchemy. And then he went to Western alchemy, and most of his writings are about the alchemists in the West from about the 2nd century, Maria Prophetessa and Hermes Trismegistus, who wrote the Emerald Tablets, and they were sort of combination of Gnostics and alchemists. And he got, and then it takes him also into Egypt. Alchemy apparently originated in the mummification process in Egypt, where the corpse was mummified, prepared for eternal life before it was placed in the pyramids and so on. So it's an ancient tradition, and it's in many cultures. There's an Indian alchemy, there's Arab alchemy, there's Chinese alchemy, and there's a Western alchemy. But he focused his attention on the Greek and Latin texts. Zosimos was a big figure, early alchemist, I think 2nd century. Anyway, in my introduction, I talk about all this, the background of Jung's interest in alchemy, all the texts that he collected, their dates. It's all in there because I think it's important to realize what a serious scholar Jung was.
Yeah.
But he wasn't writing, and people often make this mistake, he wasn't writing a history of alchemy. He's not a historian, he's a psychologist. And he's interpreting alchemy for psychology. And when he's criticized by historians, they say, well, he puts things out of order. He grabs a little bit here and a little bit there from different centuries. Well, he's doing that for a reason. He's looking at symbols. He's not looking at historical sequences. This author said this, maybe this one was reading him, and footnotes after footnotes. That's not what he was doing. He was using it for psychology.
And this is key. I highlighted this. You write, the link between the subjective and the objective is the essential condition of the alchemical process. Would you say a little bit about that? The link between the subjective and the objective.
Well, that's the secret of alchemy, as Jung saw it. He said, the alchemists had 2 rooms. There was a library over here where they studied the books and all the thoughts and writings and so on, recipes. And then over here was the laboratory, the workshop. And you see lots of pictures of the alchemists in the workshops. It's a big mess. There are furnaces and alembics and all kinds of equipment there. And they're working with materials. So those are out there. Those are real objects. The prima materia, as they called it, the material that they assembled with their recipes and then put in the vessel at the beginning, they called it the prime matter, the prima materia, were real stuff from nature. There were bits and pieces of this, sometimes cow dung, sometimes herbs, sometimes a stag's horn, or objects that they would assemble because they thought these had the ingredients they need to make what they're trying to trying to get to. And so they're actually working in the objective world with objects, but then what they see as they're working are images. Now, imagine this. I mean, you can do this when you look in the clouds. You're seeing a cloud. I've done this a number of times. After our little dog died, this was 20 years ago, we were at St. Bart's, and sitting on the beach one evening, I looked up in the clouds and I saw him up there. There he is. So, you can look into objects and see memories. So what is inside and what is outside? There is a cloud up there. It has that form. But to me, it has a special meaning, and it's doing some things. Well, the alchemists were contributing to the process by projecting into it, and they would see eventually what was called a homunculus, a little man inside the vessel that had been created by the process. And when this homunculus was created, they thought, well, we're coming close. Now we're coming, to the point where we're going to get to the magic thing. Now, that homunculus didn't really exist in the vessel, but something was in the vessel, like me seeing the dog in the cloud.
Yeah.
There's the homunculus. Look at him. Well, it was some smoke in a certain form. And they would get very excited about that because that's, Jung would say, that evoked an unconscious archetypal content. So as they're working out there in the material, in there, a process is taking place. And as the outer things are being transformed, the inner life is being transformed. So at the end, if they get something, at the end they get a little stone like this, a little stone. This stone if you hold it up to the light, you can see all kinds of things in it. It's magic. Okay, so if they get something like this at the end of the process, they have a material object, but more importantly for Jung, they have changed internally. They've developed a spiritual attitude. They've come together. Their opposites have come, the inner opposites have come. So they're more whole at the end of the process, and they have something in their hand that represents the union of the opposites. So inner and outer are very connected, but that's life. What is inner and outer? I wrote a book a couple of years ago. I don't know if we've ever discussed that, Laura.
No, we didn't.
Outside, inside, and all around.
Mm-hmm.
And I take up that question, how do you know what's outside and what's inside?
I'd love to do an episode with you about that, because that is a huge interest of mine, and that I see a need for that. I see a need for more understanding of that.
Okay, we'll do that in the future sometime.
Okay.
One other thing I'd like to mention, I think it was last year, I did a book called Ways to the Self with Diane Stanley. She's the artist, okay?
Yes.
She's an American woman, also from Illinois originally, somewhere outside Chicago, I think. And she now lives in England. She's in her 70s, I think. She's been a long-time practitioner of Tibetan Buddhism, and now in recent years has taken up Jungian thought and went through analysis. And then she contacted me after her analysis. And she and I wrote a chapter in this book. It's chapter 3, called Pictures from Analysis. So these are pictures that she made while she was in analysis some years ago. And we discussed them using alchemy. So we're doing what Jung did with Wolfgang Pauli, but we're doing it together. Jung didn't do it with Pauli, but she and I are having a conversation about these pictures that she made. And we're using alchemical terms and the process. So you can see how it can be applied actually in clinical work. There are Jungians who do that, at least in the back of their mind. They're thinking about an alchemical process with their patients and what's going on in the analysis. If the patient is interested, they might reference some of it, or they might not, but they have it as a model for individuation. There are stages of the alchemical process.
And it happens naturally.
It happens as the process unfolds. If it really takes hold. You had a very good analysis, powerful, deep. You know what that is. And when that process starts going, you can see stages moving as the alchemists call it, the opus takes hold and continues the alchemical work. Also, Mary Louise von Franz wrote a book called Alchemical Analysis or Alchemical Psychotherapy, I think. So she was very keen on alchemy.
Yeah,
One
it's
of the few Jungians. Yeah, sorry.
No, it's okay. A volume that was published by Inner City Books, and it's titled Alchemy: An Introduction. And I think it's one of their largest books. It's an introduction, but it's a huge book. And so again, because I want to make sure that I let the listeners know the title of this book is Jung and Alchemy, A Path to Individuation. It includes 6 of your lectures, which include an introduction to Jung's writings on alchemy, alchemical symbols as states of mind, alchemy as active imagination, alchemy in a dream series, the alchemy of transcendence in relationship, and the culmination of Jung's opus, Mysterium Conjunctionis, which you had mentioned earlier. It wouldn't be a Murray Stein episode without some Twitter questions. So I have a couple here that I would like to ask. William Stickevers asks, can individuation begin without a crisis, or does the opus require a descent?
Well, it depends how you define individuation. Individuation is a lifelong psychological and spiritual developmental process. It starts at birth. But at birth, you have a crisis, right? The so-called birth trauma. So your life starts with a crisis, and you have many small ones and greater ones during the course of your life. We think of, in the individuation process, there are some periods of transition, like adolescence. And adolescence is a crisis time where identity is being looked for and established. And then there's another transition at midlife, around the age of 38, 40. That's where Jung did his Red Book. And that's a transition from the first half of life to the second half of life. Okay. And that has crisis features to it. And those crisis features trigger a process of reflection and often drive people into analysis. A lot of people come into analysis because they're having a midlife crisis with all the things that happen then: divorces, deaths, right. Job, career changes, whatnot. And then there's another one, maybe two, around retirement. When people retire, there's a big transition from an active life with lots of responsibilities, and if you're a CEO or even not, but to a life that is relatively unstructured unless you create some structures yourself. Right. And so there's a crisis period there that can produce deep reflection. So I work with people nowadays, I don't have many clients anymore. I don't take new ones. But the ones I've been seeing for quite a long time are in this later phase, and it's very difficult. Yeah. You're confronting death much more acutely than you are earlier, unless you have some kind of illness. You're confronting emptiness. Maybe you live alone. Your spouse is not around anymore, has died, or you're divorced. So it's a very different stage of life that you're having to adjust to, and it can produce a very powerful motivation to individuate, in the sense that we mean individuation. Go deeper, do active imagination, look at your dreams more consistently, and find symbols. It's a matter of also of looking back on life, on your life. What has been the myth that you've lived by? Mm-hmm. What has been your myth? Mm-hmm. What are your fundamental values? What have you lived? What have you contributed? This is material that we work with but to answer your question, usually the trigger to the next stage of individuation is some kind of a crisis.
Mm-hmm. And the second part of that was, does the opus require a descent?
Well, there's the idea that individuation happens whether you are aware of it or not. It's a natural process that's going on. The self is individuating in your unconscious, whether you see it or not. Mm. And so you don't have to make the descent. Making the descent gives you a view of what's going on and allows you to participate in it. And in a sense, to intensify and accelerate it and make it more conscious. Mm-hmm. And that has a great value for your sense of yourself, that you feel close to your what Jung calls destiny, that you're on a path. Otherwise, you can go through life without making a descent. Plenty of people do. They just get by. They live on their defenses and make the best of things. But in the Jungian world, we put great value on becoming conscious of what's going on in the inner world.
That's what it's all about. So I have one other quick question. Shadow Work Pro asks, mystical places add depth. Do locations affect your inner experience?
Well, certainly some people have found that. I find that Zürich affects my inner experience. I first went to Zürich when I was in college. I spent a summer in Europe looking around, passed through Zürich and was fascinated by it. Didn't know anything about Jung or any of that stuff. But it just sort of stuck with me. I remember it vividly. Mm-hmm. And then when I came back, at the age of, I guess I was 26 at the time, and lived here for 4 years. I just loved it. I loved Switzerland. I feel at home here.
Mm-hmm.
And then moving back here at the age of 60. What I discovered, interestingly, at the age of 60, in an exhibition in the church, in the big church in Zürich, the Grossmünster Church, they had an exhibition about the Reformation. And during the Reformation, there was a conflict between the city people and the country people. And the city people were the Zwingli reformers, and the country people were Anabaptists. And the Anabaptists didn't want to baptize babies, and the Zwingli reformers insisted, and then they ended up persecuting them and drowning their leaders in the river, in the Limmat. What I discovered when I came back was that my mother's family came from those Anabaptists. The name was on the list of the people drowned in the river. So I, for the first time, made a personal ancestral connection to Zurich, and that answered the question, why do I feel so at home here? Somehow something about this place feels very old and familiar, and so yeah, I think places do have an effect on people, and there are these so-called magical places. There are several of them in the United States.
Yeah.
People feel special energy, and they go there and meditate, and I think if you find one, use it. And use it for your own purposes, for meditation, for deepening yourself, for feeling, quotes, the vibrations of the universe. You know, that's what in alchemy they called the unus mundus, the one world. That's the last stage of the alchemical opus, that you feel connected to the unity of all that exists, everything that exists, and that vibrates. And in these special places, you can feel those kinds of vibrations. So go there and use them.
Yeah, I found that in Taos, New Mexico, and yeah, and I was fortunate enough to be able to visit there many, many times, and had no idea in the beginning that Jung was there. And I went to Taos Pueblo and just absolutely fell in love and in awe of the place, the land, the people, and had no idea at the time. I was in analysis. I had no idea that Jung had been there.
He sat on the roof of one of those pueblos and talked to Mountain Lake. It's a famous episode.
Yeah.
I just want to thank you very much, Laura, for this opportunity to share with your audience. And I want to thank you for all that you've done for Jungians. It's speaking of Jung, I don't know, you've had over 100 episodes. I hear from many people, Jungians who've been on your program, with great appreciation. They really value what you're doing. And I want you to know that and feel it.
Well, thank you. And there would be no speaking of Jung without our guests. And you are so generous with your time, and you always come on here whenever I ask, and you talk about your material, and we have more to do. And I'm going to be bringing on an analyst after you and I say goodbye for now. And we're going to be talking about your life and your career and your body of work. And it is ongoing. And here we still are, both of us. And I appreciate all of the time that you've given me. You've always been so generous since the first time I met you 10 years ago, how generous you were with your time. And I've learned so much from you. And I was thinking about this earlier. Every single day, I think about you and something that I learned from you. And I want to thank you for that.
That's very precious.
So we will see you next time. I'm going to say goodbye for now, and I'm going to bring on Dr. Herman. Thank you, Dr. Stein.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Stephen Herman is a Jungian psychoanalyst, a licensed marriage and family therapist, and author in Oakland, California. A graduate of the University of California, Santa Cruz, he earned a Ph.D. in clinical psychology from the Rosebridge Graduate School at Argosy University with a dissertation on vocational development in childhood. He trained as a Jungian analyst at the C.G. Jung Institute of San Francisco. His latest books include Swami Vivekananda and C.G. Jung, Yoga in the West, Vocational Dreams, Calling Archetypes and Nuclear Symbols, and Meister Eckhart and C.G. Jung on the Vocation of the Self. Later this month, the first title in the series Routledge Introductions to Contemporary Analytical Psychology and Neo-Jungian Studies by series editor Stefano Carpani will be released. Murray Stein, Individuation, Transformation, and the Ways to the Self in Jungian Psychology was written by Dr. Herrmann and will be released on November 17th. Dr. Herrmann, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure to be here.
This book was a surprise to me. It's extraordinary. I was stunned to read a psychobiography of Dr. Murray Stein, which is just in the beginning part of the book. It's a very long book because you cover his body of work, which is enormous and growing. So tell us a little bit about the genesis of this book.
Well, the genesis was early July of 2024 when I received an email from the series editor Stefano Carpani inviting me to write one of the volumes in his new series on neo-Jungian psychoanalysis. So I was very honored and appreciative, and of course I said yes, so here I am. I told Stefano I thought I could have it done by the spring of 2025, and I was able to finish it by January 1st. So I was pleased to be able to get it out on time and be the lead-off volume in his series. And there's no better person to lead off the series, I believe, than Murray Stein.
So this is specifically this series that we're referring to is on the Jungians, contemporary Jungians, right? Jungians today. And
Yes.
he specifically asked you to write about Dr. Stein because of your affinity for him, your affection, appreciation. He is an inspiration to you. So tell us about that.
Well, the beginning of my study of Murray's work really goes back to the early 90s when I picked up solar conscience, lunar conscience, and also Jung's treatment of Christianity, which was Murray's doctoral dissertation in the Divinity School in Chicago. Mm-hmm. And those two books made a big impact on me. And then in 1997, I was asked by the editor of the C.G. Jung Institute in San Francisco Library Journal, John Beebe, who you know, Laura, to review 7 of Murray's books at the time. There was only 7 at that time, but he had many papers that were collected and not yet in volumes. And so I reviewed everything I could find, including those 7 volumes. And that started off my scholarly interest in Murray's work, in particular, his oeuvre or opus, which is now, as we've been talking about, evolved into 10 volumes with Chiron Publications of his collected writings. So I review 9 of the volumes since volume 10 was not published when I began. And with the exception of volume 2, which I encourage readers to take a look at. The book itself covers those volumes, and I refer specifically to them in the footnotes because I want to direct people to the collected writings and as we were saying in the early dialogue before we began to record, Laura, he's now publishing volume 10 with Chiron, and it's predicted that there will be at least 14 volumes in total.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had neglected to mention that. I wasn't aware. Mm-hmm. So your book, again, it's titled Murray Stein, Individuation, Transformation, and the Ways to the Self. That's so Dr. Stein. In Jungian psychology, you include what you call a brief psychobiography. It's quite thorough, and I appreciated reading it because there are things in there that I didn't know, and I love knowing people's backgrounds. And maybe some of the listeners will have gotten that because of my long introductions, but I want the backstory. I want to know how this person became who they are. And you go into detail about his parents, his upbringing, and I didn't know that he had lived in South Dakota, North Dakota, and Houston. And so there's this great background, and then you go through you go through Dr. Stein's major writings. And just out of curiosity, is there a reason why you excluded volume 2, which is, I believe, on myth?
Well, Murray covers quite a bit on myths in the collected writings, and I was aware of his work on Hermes and the Greek myths when I read In Midlife, which was another one of the books I read before I wrote the essay.
Yeah, that's a popular one.
His book Transformation. The Transformative Image is the title of the essay I wrote. So a lot of his work on the Greek myths in particular are there in the collected writings, some of the other volumes. So I felt like I already had a pretty good grasp of some of Murray's thought on the Greek myths, including in Solar Conscience, Lunar Conscience, the myth of Justice, Thetis, and also Hephaestus appears in one of the chapters of my book. So I do cover quite a bit on myth, and my particular interest really focuses more on Murray's contribution to the Judeo-Christian mythos, since that was part of some of my background. But yes, I think that a psychobiography helps us understand how it is that Murray has shaped his particular vision from birth until his current age now at 82. And it gives us an understanding of also what's been missing in the field of analytical psychology, what Jung left out. The fact that Murray is both a theologian and a Protestant minister who received his master's from Yale Divinity School and doctorate at the University of Chicago, Divinity School in Chicago, really helps us navigate some of the areas in Jung psychology that have remained somewhat problematic for some, and a question for others, particularly around the Christ myth, which in my psychobiography I talk about the Bible as a nuclear symbol in Murray's childhood, and how he was taught to memorize passages from the Old and New Testament, and how much that has become a part of his contribution, neo-Jungian vision that Stefano is putting forth now. Because I think we need to also see from a theologian, as well as a very prominent and seasoned analyst who was the president of the IAP, among so many other distinguished titles, where there's a limitation in Jung's ability to really understand certain aspects of the Bible, particularly in the Gospel of John, which was one of Murray's lectures that he gave at Mundelein College and in Chicago. Back in 1988, he was doing this, but his dissertation goes back to 1985, and there he speaks about a number of issues that I think are very useful in our understanding of analysis, and particularly types of transference and countertransference, such as the three that he identifies in his psychology. And that's the maieutic transference, which is has to do with pregnancy and birth, the ability of the analyst to become a kind of a mother in the relationship, and help give birth to certain aspects of the patient's inner life through an interior examination in the countertransference, and also the shamanic countertransference, the third type, which is hermetic, as Murray says. And that has more to do with the production or producing of a panacea of some kind, an antidote to help the patient heal from childhood wounds and traumas and overcome their tragic fate by loving their fate and then arriving at a destiny. The first kind of countertransference he mentions is the power transference. That's more patriarchal. That has more to do with the aspects of the countertransference dynamics that most analysts and psychoanalysts are familiar with.
Mm-hmm. Well, this book is fantastic because, as I mentioned so many times, Dr. Stein's body of work is so huge that we now have his collected writings, which are ongoing, but you can point people in the right direction and kind of break down where he writes what. So it is a great reference book. But I do want to mention, I want to read this that is in the beginning. It's on page 5. You write, you're talking about Dr. Stein. He has disseminated and distilled Jung's wisdom into practical and universally relevant teachings, and his works are amongst the best ever penned by a Jungian. He has no competitors. He stands in a genre all on his own, and he is perhaps our foremost teacher in the field of Jungian psychoanalysis. Those are powerful words and well-deserved for Dr. Stein.
Well, the psychobiography makes an argument for that point, Laura, because in chapter 2, I open with a review, an overview of the 4 pillars of Jungian psychoanalysis, and I state very clearly, following Dr. Stein's model in that book, why it is we need to have a balance in our Jungian training and teaching institutions between what he's calling the 4 pillars of analytical psychology or Jungian psychoanalysis. And that is individuation, the first pillar, relationships, which takes up the second pillar, the relationship between the analyst and the patient, how central that is to psychotherapy general, and is probably the most agreed upon pillar that creates the crucial change in analytic patients. And then following that, dream work, which is the third pillar, followed by active imagination as the fourth pillar. The reason I said that, Laura, in the on page 5, as you said, the fact that Murray has had so much influence on the field through his writings, his teaching, and his analytic work, but also his work at the IAP and with the institutes as a training analyst. It really places his work, I think, in a pivotal position because of the accent he's placing on the balance between these four pillars. You see, a virus of superficiality has come into our field as a result of modernism and postmodernism, which Murray clearly spells out in that chapter. Mm. And he says that we're at risk as institutes, as Jungian institutes throughout the world now, because they're spread throughout all the continents, practically anyway, almost. And we want to really stress the importance of dream work and active imagination, which is really the classical training that Jung gave to the early Jungians, the classical Jungians around him in the Zürich area. And we've lost some of that, you see. And with that loss, there's a sense of a need for someone in our field to give voice to the importance of a return to our roots and our ancestry. And that's what this volume transmits, and in line with Stefano's vision, that Murray is not just a classically trained Jungian, he's also a post-Jungian and a neo-Jungian, as Stefano says. And that means he's bringing something new to our analytic awareness. And so many of the case studies that I quote in the book, Laura, have to do with some of the transformations that Murray talks about that come in late stage individuation, midlife to late stage individuation, where there's a total change that happens, a metamorphosis, as he says in his book, Transference, Emergence of the Self. And his primary symbol for that is the butterfly emerging out of the chrysalis or cocoon. I've seen this in my own clinical practice, working with a 6-year-old girl, that this also can be depicted in childhood with working with child patients. But Murray brings in a spiritual dimension of our field that somehow gets lost, I think, when there's not enough attention placed on the fourth pillar in particular, which is active imagination. So yes, I do believe that very much, because I'm writing from my own personal experience, of course, and I'm biased in my view. We all have to admit our biases, as William James taught us. And mine is that writing that review of Murray Stein's book, Transformation, really did transform my life. And then meeting him in San Francisco at one of our conferences here, and exchanging a few letters with him, and then being asked to write this book, it's been a kind of a game changer.
You say that Murray Stein regards Jung as a shaman, and that also somewhere else in the book you mentioned that Dr. Stein regards himself as a missionary, a Jungian missionary, right?
He states in his book on the 5 stages of a man's life, or the animus in a woman, that there's a fourth stage that he calls the missionary stage. And then there's a fifth stage called the sage. He has 5 stages of development that he posits. And it's very clear that he doesn't mean this in the sense that one could easily have an issue with the word missionary, because it brings up all kinds of associations to the history of the missionaries in North America and Central and South America and Mexico and throughout Africa, of course. And no, Murray was the son of a missionary, you see. So for him, missionary means really a mission, that he really thinks that we all have a mission. He believes that, and he knows it, practically speaking, through his empirical work with patients, that when we tap in deeply enough into the ground of being, and he uses the term being with a capital B, so he really moves into even theological, metaphysical dimensions of that basic ground out of which the vocation, the calling arises, the mission that we have. And often the way in which this occurs in analysis can be seen in the cases that I pulled out from the collected writings, where there is a clear calling, where even someone's name is called out in the dream, which creates a kind of divinization, a sense that one has a special mission to bring about some kind of gift in the world, like you with this Speaking of Jung series, Laura, this is one of the ways you've been gifting not only the Jung community, but the community generally. And that's why when I made that statement on page 5, I meant beyond the limited field of Jungian analysis to the collectivity generally.
Right.
Murray does reach the collective in that kind of a way. I keep saying Murray because I feel like I know him personally. I don't really, because we don't have a real close personal relationship, but nevertheless, he has become a kind of an internalized self-representation for something that he calls a transformative relationship, that we can form transformative relationships to certain people in our lives. And it doesn't have to come directly through an analytic relationship where you're in analysis or consultation with you. It can come through a book. It can come through a correspondence. And he shows this to be true in the life of the great artists in the book Transformation. Rilke, the German poet Rilke, Mellon, Rembrandt, Picasso. He uses these case examples to show that individuation and transformation takes place in a much larger context than the psychoanalytic matrix in which we do our work as Jungians, that there's a whole field outside. And Murray's, I think, having an impact on that field, like Jung has, of course. Many people read Jung who haven't set foot in analysis, or they're just beginning, or they're in analysis and want to understand the psychology better. So I think that there's no better teacher in the field than Dr. Stein.
Yeah, you do mention that. I have that a note here on that Dr. Stein places special significance on transformative relationships. Yes. And thank you for reminding me of that, because that's important. And as far as referring to him as Dr. Stein, I decided when I started this podcast that I would, out of respect and deference to my guests, refer to them by their titles, and also to establish their authority with the listeners. But in recent times, we are all on first name bases, because we have Murray and Sonu and Les and Stefano. And so we've got all these first name
Right.
Relationship type
Yeah.
monikers. So Murray is Murray, and I have to always stop myself and say Dr. Stein, but I love calling him Murray because there's only one Murray.
Yeah.
You mentioned Murray's father being a missionary.
A Baptist missionary in Canada.
I don't know the difference. Maybe I'll cut this part out. Is there a difference between a pastor and a missionary?
Well, he's both, of course. Pastors often have a mission, a vocation, which is to preach the word of God. And Murray's father was a great preacher, and I think that we hear that sometimes in Murray's writings and his voice. As Dr. Stein says, Murray says, Jung had a preacher in him, and so does Murray. And we hear that voice sometimes in his writing without, putting on airs. The nice thing, I think, about getting to know him is that he's so grounded, he's so down to earth.
Yes.
And I think part of it is relocating his ancestry now, his Swiss roots. So like you said, I tell that story too. And as we said in the previous episode about finding his ancestry in the Grossmünster.
And you had entered backstage, I think I was about 3/4 of the way through with Dr. Stein, but he relates that story that you relate in the book about finding his ancestral connection to Zurich.
Well, he writes about that, in the collected writings too. So what I've done is I've found anecdotes in various volumes and pulled them together to help create this psychobiography, as well as having interviewed him while I was writing the book on a couple of occasions. And he helped me out with some of the historical facts in putting it together.
Okay, great. Yeah, so that was something that I either didn't see or didn't remember. And when you mentioned that being a preacher, when we had started recording, I had forgotten to just let him go. I kept thinking of a question I wanted to ask, and I was waiting for a break and not getting one. And then I interrupted him a couple of times, which I don't like to do. And I had forgotten that with Dr. Stein, I need to just let him go because he can cover it all. And I think John Beebe was like that too. And I kept wanting to jump in. So what I wanted to mention as we close up here is you quote Dr. Stein on page 18 as saying, "My father was a pastor, and the last words I heard him speak as he lay dying and some fellow pastors were visiting him in the hospital was, 'I would still like to be of service.' He said this with tears in his eyes." And I thought of Dr. Stein when I read that, that here at age 82, he probably still does want to be of service, and he is.
And he is.
And that is so inspiring to me. And I want to thank you for all the time and effort you put into this book, which is extraordinary. And I'm so thankful that you took this on because I do think, I don't know that much about you. We just met today, but from the little bit that I've come to know, you do seem like the perfect person to have written this. So I want to thank you for that.
Well, thank you, Laura. And I just want to thank Murray and Stefano for asking me to do this. So, yeah, and thank you for doing this this Speaking of Jung series, because I've heard some great things from patients, from people who've written me about your series, and you're really getting the word out there. And
thank you.
We all are feeling a nod of thanks to you. So,
well, thank you. And the book, it will be released on November 17th. It is currently available for pre-order from Amazon. There will be a link in the description on the video and in the show notes on speakingofjung.com. So thank you so much again for joining us.
You're welcome. Mm-hmm.
Speaking of Jung is not just a podcast, it is also a website. Please visit speakingofjung.com, where you will find extensive information on the life and work of C.G. Jung, show notes, and audio downloads for all of our 173 episodes, a comprehensive books page, a blog, and now a monthly email newsletter, which you can sign up for at the bottom of our front page. All of our episodes are also available on YouTube podcasts, which you can access by subscribing to this channel, Jungian Laura. It's free. Just click the subscribe button below. I created Speaking of Jung 10 years ago, and all of our content is still free to access, but it is not free to produce. Please consider contributing to our tip jar on Patreon for just $5 a month, or visit our support page at speakingofjung.com/support for links on all the ways you can help keep this podcast and our website alive. With very special thanks to Dr. Stephen Buser and Jennifer Fitzgerald at Chiron Publications, and to Dr. Stefano Carpani, I'm Laura London, and you've been watching a very special video edition of Speaking of Jung.